The ship shook again as another piece of the hull tore away. Ambassador Kethvar gripped his chair with clawed hands, watching the stars spin outside the cracked window. His ship, the Harmony's Edge, was dying. The engines made terrible noises, and sparks flew from broken control panels. "Sir, we have lost another shield generator," said his science officer, Wispera. Her voice was calm, but Kethvar could see fear in her glowing eyes. She was young for her kind, only 300 years old, and had never seen real war before. Kethvar looked at the main screen. Behind them, moving like a dark cloud across space, came the Void Devourers. They looked like giant metal spiders made of twisted metal and glowing lights. Each one was as big as a moon. They ate everything in their path. Planets, ships, entire star systems. Nothing could stop them. "How long until they catch us?" Kethvar asked. 2 hours, maybe 3, said the pilot, his voice shaking. "Our engines are too damaged. We cannot go faster." 3 months ago, the Void Devourers had appeared at the edge of Zephyrian space. No one knew where they came from. They just arrived and started consuming everything. The first colony world died in minutes. The second lasted only an hour. By the time the third world fell, the Zephyrian government knew they faced something. Beyond their understanding, the Galactic Council had sent their best fleets. The Altarians brought ships made of living crystal that could bend light itself. The Vorthans sent massive dreadnoughts with weapons that could crack planets. The Confederation had deployed their newest battleships, each one carrying enough firepower to destroy a small fleet. Nothing worked. The Devourers ate them all. Kethvar remembered watching the battle reports. Admiral Zex Thor, the greatest military mind of the Altarian Empire, had tried everything. Precision strikes, massive bombardments, even ramming attacks. The crystal ships had shattered like glass. The Vorthon dreadnoughts were pulled apart, piece by piece. The Confederation battleships simply vanished into the dark mass of enemy machines. "Sir," Wispara said quietly, "I have been thinking about our options." "What options?" Kethvar asked. "The Council fleets are gone. Our colonies are gone. Our homeworld will fall within days. There is one possibility," she said. "The human fleet." The bridge went silent. Even the sparking control panels seemed to quiet down. Everyone stared at Wispara as if she had suggested flying directly into a star. "The humans?" said the pilot. "The Deathworlders? You want us to ask them for help?" Kethvar understood their fear. Every species in the galaxy knew about humanity. They came from a world so dangerous that most aliens died within hours of landing there. The air was poison to some species. The gravity crushed others. The weather could kill you in dozens of different ways. Even the plants and animals tried to eat you, but somehow, humans had not only survived on this nightmare world, they had thrived. They had built cities, developed technology, and eventually reached the stars. Other species saw this as proof that humans were either incredibly tough or completely insane. Maybe both. "Think about it," Wispara said. "Every major fleet has tried to stop the Devourers using normal tactics. What if we need something abnormal? What if we need someone crazy enough to try something different? Where would we even find them?" asked the communications officer. "Humans do not stay in one place. They wander around space in their fleets." "I have their last known coordinates," Wispara said. "They were seen near the outer rim, 3 sectors away." Kethvar thought about his people. 50,000 Zephyrian refugees were hiding in civilian ships scattered across nearby systems. They were waiting for him to find them a safe place to go. Every hour they waited, the Devourers got closer. The Galactic Council had officially declared the war lost. They told everyone to evacuate to the far sectors and hoped the Devourers would be satisfied with half the galaxy. But Kethvar knew better. These machines would not stop. They would eat everything until nothing remained. "What do we know about human military tactics?" he asked. "Very little," Wispara admitted. "They keep to themselves mostly. But there are stories. Pirates who tried to raid human convoys and were never seen again. Slavers who learned to avoid human space entirely. And there was that incident with the Krell Dominion." Kethvar remembered that story. The Krell had demanded tribute from a human mining colony. Instead of paying or running away, the humans had somehow turned their mining equipment into weapons. They had fought the Krell fleet to a standstill, using tools meant for digging up asteroids. "The stories say human ships are ugly and primitive," the pilot said. "They use ballistic weapons instead of energy beams. They ram enemy ships instead of using proper tactics." "Maybe that is exactly what we need," Kethvar said. "Ugly and primitive might work where beautiful and advanced has failed." Another explosion shook the ship. This time, the lights went out for several seconds before the emergency power kicked in. "Sir, we have to decide now," Wispara said. "We can try to reach the human fleet, or we can send a message to our people telling them to scatter and hope for the best." Kethvar looked around his bridge. These were good people. They had served faithfully, followed orders, done everything by the book. The book had gotten their entire civilization eaten by machines from beyond the stars. "Set course for the human coordinates," he said. "Sir?" the pilot asked, as if he had not heard correctly. "You heard me. Send a message to our refugee ships. Tell them to follow us but stay hidden until we know what kind of reception we will get." "And if the humans refuse to help us?" Wispara asked. "Then we die," Kethvar said simply. "But at least we die trying something new instead of repeating the same failures that killed everyone else." The pilot's hands shook as he entered the new coordinates. The jump drive charged slowly, sparks flying from damaged circuits. Behind them, the Void Devourers continued their relentless approach, consuming everything in their path. As the stars blurred around them and the ship entered hyperspace, Kethvar wondered what they would find at their destination. Would the humans even listen to their plea? Would they care about the fate of another species? He had heard that humans were unpredictable. Some stories painted them as savage warriors who solved every problem with violence. Others described them as surprisingly kind, helping strangers for no reward. A few tales suggested they were both, depending on the situation. Soon, he would find out which stories were true. The Harmony's Edge flew through hyperspace toward an uncertain fate, carrying the desperate hope of an entire species. Behind them, in normal space, the Void Devourers paused their advance. For the first time since arriving in Zephyrian space, something had caught their attention. Something they had never encountered before was moving toward the edge of their detection range. The machines that had consumed 1,000 civilizations hesitated, processing data that did not match their expectations. In the darkness between stars, ancient sensors registered ships that should not exist, weapons that made no sense, and life signs from creatures that had no business being alive in the vacuum of space. The hunt was about to become interesting. The Harmony's Edge dropped out of hyperspace with a violent shudder. Warning lights flashed across the bridge as systems failed one by one. Kethvar pulled himself back into his chair and looked at the main screen. What he saw made no sense. He had expected to find a small patrol of primitive human ships. Instead, space around them was filled with vessels unlike anything he had ever seen. They were massive, angular things that looked like someone had welded together pieces of different ships. Some appeared to be built around asteroids. Others looked like they had been constructed from the hulls of destroyed warships. "By the ancestors," whispered the pilot. "How many ships are there?" "Sensors are detecting over 300 vessels," Wispara said, her voice filled with amazement. "And, sir, some of these ships are enormous. That one there is easily 10 times the size of our largest dreadnought. The biggest ship looked like someone had hollowed out a small moon and covered it with weapons. Gun turrets stuck out at odd angles, and massive engines glowed blue-white at the rear. It was ugly, brutal, and somehow magnificent. "We are being scanned," the communications officer reported. "Multiple sources, very powerful sensors." "Are they targeting us?" Kethvar asked. "I do not think so. It feels more like curiosity." A new voice came through their communication system. It was female, speaking in accented Galactic Standard. "Unknown vessel. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earthship Indomitable. You appear to be in distress. State your identity and intentions." Kethvar activated his personal translator and stepped forward. "Admiral Chen, I am Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Republic. We come seeking sanctuary and aid." There was a pause. Then, "Zephyrian? You're a long way from home, Ambassador. Last we heard, your space was being overrun by some kind of machine. Entities. That is correct, Kethvar said. The Void Devourers have destroyed our colonies and scattered our fleets. We have 50,000 refugees in need of protection. Another pause. Longer this time. Kethvar imagined the humans discussing among themselves, deciding whether to help or simply destroy his damaged ship. Ambassador, we're going to bring you aboard the Indomitable for a face-to-face meeting. Our tractors are engaging now. Please, do not resist. Kethvar felt the ship shake as invisible beams of force took hold of it. Through the windows, he watched as they were pulled toward the massive human vessel. Up close, it was even more intimidating. The hull was scarred with battle damage that had been repaired with patches of different colored metal. Weapon ports opened like hungry mouths as they approached. Sir, Wispera said quietly, their ship. It is not just a warship. I am reading civilian signatures, families, children. She was right. As they got closer, Kethvar could see sections that were clearly residential areas. Gardens grew under transparent domes. Small ships that were obviously civilian craft moved between the larger vessels. They live here, he realized. This is not just a fleet. It is a floating city. The docking bay that received them was larger than most spaceports. Human workers in environmental suits guided the Harmony's edge to a landing pad, then quickly surrounded it with repair equipment. They began fixing his ship without even being asked. Admiral Sarah Chen met them at the airlock. She was a short, stocky woman with graying hair and mechanical arms that had obviously replaced organic ones. Scars covered the visible parts of her face and neck. She wore a simple uniform that was clean but patched in several places. "Welcome aboard the Indomitable, Ambassador," she said, extending one of her artificial hands. "Sorry about the rough. Welcome, but we have to be careful out here." Kethvar shook her hand, surprised by how gentle her grip was despite the mechanical fingers. "Thank you for not shooting us, Admiral." Chen laughed, a sound like grinding metal that was somehow warm. "We don't shoot first and ask questions later. Usually. Tell me about these Void Devourers." As they walked through the ship's corridors, Kethvar explained what had happened to his people. Chen listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification about the enemy's capabilities or tactics. The corridors were wide and functional, with pipes and cables running along the walls. Human crew members nodded respectfully to their admiral as she passed. Kethvar noticed that many of them had prosthetic limbs or visible scars. These people had seen combat. They passed through residential sections where families lived in small but comfortable quarters. Children played in the hallways, their laughter echoing off metal walls. Some of the kids stopped to stare at Kethvar and Wispara with wide, curious eyes. "How long have your people lived in space?" Wispara asked. "This fleet has been our home for about 60 years, Chen replied. "Earth got a bit crowded, and some of us decided we preferred the freedom of space. We trade with colonies, offer protection services, sometimes take on refugees like yourselves." They entered what appeared to be a command center. Multiple screens showed views of the fleet and surrounding space. Officers worked at stations that looked like they had been built from spare parts and determination. "Now then," Chen said, settling into a worn chair, "tell me exactly what we're dealing with." Kethvar described the Void Devourers in detail: their size, their ability to consume matter and energy, their apparent immunity to conventional weapons. He showed her recordings from the battles, including the destruction of the combined Galactic Council fleets. Chen watched silently, her expression growing more serious. When the recordings ended, she leaned back in her chair. "These things destroyed the Altarian Crystal Fleet?" she asked. "In minutes? And the Vorthon dreadnoughts? They were pulled apart like children's toys." Chen nodded slowly. "We've heard of these other fleets, very advanced, very powerful, very elegant." She made the last word sound like a curse. "Yes," Kethvar said, "the finest military technology in the galaxy. It made no difference." "Good," Chen said, surprising him. "Good?" "Ambassador, there's something you need to understand about humans. We didn't become spacefaring because we built beautiful ships or developed elegant weapons. We reached the stars because Earth spent millions of years trying to kill us, and we were too stupid to die." She stood and walked to a viewport. Outside, Kethvar could see human ships moving in formation. They were ugly, scarred, and somehow reassuring. Every other species in the galaxy builds their military around the idea of clean, efficient warfare, Chen continued. Precise strikes, minimal casualties, elegant solutions. That works fine when you're fighting other civilized beings. But these devourers are not civilized beings, Wispera said, understanding. Exactly. They're more like a force of nature. And humans have been fighting forces of nature since we first crawled out of caves. We don't fight fair. We don't fight clean. We fight to survive, Chen turned back to them. Your refugees, Ambassador. Where are they? Hidden in civilian ships throughout the sector. I can provide coordinates. Send the coordinates to my navigation officer. We'll start gathering them immediately. Just like that? Kethvar asked. You will help us? Chen looked at him as if he had asked whether water was wet. Of course we'll help you. That's what we do. She activated a communication panel. All ships, this is Admiral Chen. We have a refugee situation and a new enemy to deal with. Begin search and rescue operations for Zephyrian civilians. Battle. Stations, but keep weapons powered down until we know what we're facing. The response was immediate. Across the fleet, ships began moving with purpose. Smaller vessels broke away to search for the hidden refugees, while the larger warships formed defensive positions. How many ships do you have? Kethvar asked. Active warships, about 150. But every ship in this fleet can fight if necessary. Even our civilian transports carry weapons. And you think this will be enough to stop the devourers? Chen smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Ambassador, we once held off an entire Krell invasion fleet with converted cargo haulers and mining equipment. These devourers might be tougher, but they're about to learn something that every pirate, slaver, and hostile alien in this sector knows, which is, you don't mess with Earth's children. 3 days later, Kethvar stood on the observation deck of the Indomitable, watching human crews prepare for war. What he saw defied everything he knew about military doctrine. In the docking bays below, human workers were welding additional armor plating onto ships. But instead of the elegant curved designs favored by other species, they were attaching flat, angular pieces of metal that looked like they had been torn from the hulls of other vessels. It is not beautiful, Wispera said, joining him at the window. No, Kethvar agreed. But I am beginning to think beauty is not the point. A new voice spoke behind them. Beauty gets you killed out here. They turned to see Captain Rodriguez, commander of the destroyer Perseverance. He was a tall, thin man with burn scars covering half his face. His left eye had been replaced with a mechanical implant that glowed softly red. Captain, Kethvar said, I was hoping to speak with you about your battle tactics. Rodriguez gestured for them to follow him. Come on, I'll show you something interesting. They walked through corridors that seemed to have been designed by someone who expected them to be damaged regularly. Everything was built with thick metal walls and multiple backup systems. Even the lighting had redundant power sources. This is our weapons control center, Rodriguez said, leading them into a room filled with screens and control panels. Take a look at this. He activated a display showing technical specifications for human weapons. Kethvar studied the information and frowned. These are primitive, he said, trying to be polite. Exactly, Rodriguez grinned. We use kinetic weapons, bullets, shells, missiles with explosive warheads. Most species abandoned those centuries ago in favor of energy weapons. But energy weapons are more efficient, Wispera said. They cause precise damage with minimal collateral effects. Efficient against shields and energy-resistant armor, sure, Rodriguez agreed. But what if your enemy doesn't use shields? What if their armor is designed to absorb energy attacks? Kethvar thought about the Void Devourers. Their dark hulls seemed to drink in laser fire and plasma bolts. The Devourers did seem resistant to energy weapons. Hard to be resistant to. A chunk of metal moving at significant fractions of light speed, Rodriguez said, and even harder to absorb the blast from a nuclear warhead. He led them to another section of the ship. Here, human engineers were working on weapons that looked more like industrial equipment than military hardware. This is Mac, our chief engineer, Rodriguez said, introducing them to a short, stocky woman with grease-stained coveralls and augmented arms that looked like they could bend steel. Pleasure, Mac said, not looking up from the device she was working on. Just putting the finishing touches on our new Devourer killers. What is it? Kethvar asked, examining the weapon. It looked like a mining drill crossed with a missile. Launcher. Penetrating warheads, Mac explained. Designed to punch through enemy hulls and detonate inside. Each one carries a small fusion bomb. That seems excessive, Wispera said. Mac finally looked up, her expression serious. Lady, these things ate the combined fleets of half the galaxy. Excessive is exactly what we need. Rodriguez showed them more human innovations. Ships designed to ram enemy. Vessels at high speed. Fighters that could function even after losing half their components. Boarding pods built like giant bullets, designed to punch through enemy hulls so Marines could fight inside enemy ships. But why board enemy vessels at all? Kethvar asked. It seems unnecessarily dangerous. Because sometimes you need to plant. Explosives by hand, said a new voice. They turned to see Lieutenant Torres, the leader of the human Marine boarding teams. She was a compact woman with multiple scars and the kind of eyes that had seen too much combat. The way we see it, Torres continued, every enemy ship has weak points, power cores, command centers, life support systems. Sometimes the only way to reach those weak points is to go inside and find them. Even if the environment is hostile to human life, Wispara asked. Torres laughed. Honey, we come from a planet where the environment is hostile to human life. We're used to it. She showed them the equipment her Marines carried. Instead of elegant energy weapons, they had ballistic firearms that could punch holes through bulkheads. Instead of lightweight combat suits, they wore heavy armor that looked like it could survive being thrown into a volcano. The trick is to be tougher than whatever you're fighting, Torres explained. These devourers might be made of metal and nightmares, but they've never faced anyone stupid enough to climb inside their guts and start blowing things up. That evening, Kethvar attended a meeting of human ship captains. The conference room was functional and undecorated, filled with worn chairs around a metal table. Maps and technical displays covered the walls. Admiral Chen stood at the head of the table, her mechanical fingers drumming against the metal surface. All right, people, we've got 50,000 refugees to protect and an enemy that's eaten everything else thrown at it. Ideas? Hit them hard and fast, suggested Captain Kim of the battleship Retribution. Concentrate our firepower on their command ships. Assuming they have command ships, Chen replied. Intelligence suggests they operate as a collective. Then we hit them everywhere at once, said Captain Okafor of the carrier Defiant. Spread them out, force them to divide their attention. What about their ability to absorb matter and energy? Asked Captain Volkov of the cruiser Resilient. Our weapons might just make them stronger. Mac spoke up from her seat near the back. I've been thinking about that. These things consume matter, right? What if we give them something they can't digest? Explain, Chen said. Antimatter, Mac said simply. Hard to absorb something that annihilates whatever it touches. The room fell silent. Antimatter weapons were considered too dangerous for most species to use. The risk of catastrophic accidents was too high. How much do we have? Chen asked. Enough for maybe 20 warheads, Mac replied, but we'd have to get close to use them effectively. Define close, Rodriguez said. Close enough to spit on them. Another silence. Finally, Chen nodded. Do it, but those are weapons of last resort. We try conventional methods first, she turned to Torres. Lieutenant, what's the status on boarding preparations? My teams are ready, Admiral. We've studied the recordings of Devourer ships. Their hulls are thick, but not impossibly so. We can get inside. And then what? Torres smiled grimly. Then we find their hearts and cut them out. The meeting continued for hours. Humans discussed tactics that would have horrified more civilized species. Ramming attacks, suicide runs, explosions that would damage their own ships. Every strategy seemed designed around the assumption that victory would come at a terrible cost. But Kethvar began to understand something important. These humans were not planning to win a clean, elegant battle. They were planning to survive a nightmare. One more thing, Chen said as the meeting ended. Remember what we're fighting for. Those refugees didn't ask for this war, but they're counting on us to end it. Don't let them down. As the captains filed out, Kethvar approached the admiral. Your people, he said. They are not afraid. Oh, they're terrified, Chen replied. But they're more afraid of letting innocent people die than they are of dying themselves. How do you do it? How do you face impossible odds with such determination? Chen looked out through the conference room's viewport at the stars beyond. Ambassador, my species spent most of its history thinking the universe was trying to kill us. Turned out we were right. But we also learned something important. Which is? The universe might be hostile, but it's not malicious. It doesn't hate us personally. It's just dangerous. And humans have always been good at surviving dangerous things. She headed for the door, then paused. Besides, these devourers made a mistake when they started eating refugee ships. Now it's personal. Outside the conference room, the human fleet continued its preparations. In a few hours, long-range sensors would detect the approaching enemy. The battle that would determine the fate of both species was about to begin. But for now, human families slept peacefully in their quarters. Children dreamed of adventures among the stars, and engineers worked through the night to build weapons from spare parts and determination. The universe was about to learn why Earth's children had survived so long in a galaxy that didn't want them. The alarm began at 600 ship time. Keth Var jerked awake in his guest quarters aboard the Indomitable as red lights flashed and a calm voice announced, "All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill." He found Wispara in the corridor, her usually composed demeanor cracked with worry. Together they made their way to the observation deck that Admiral Chen had designated as their station during the coming battle. Through the reinforced windows, they could see the human fleet arranging itself into what looked like complete chaos. Ships moved in seemingly random directions, some accelerating toward empty space, others hanging back in defensive positions. "What are they doing?" Wispara asked. "This looks nothing like proper fleet tactics." Admiral Chen's voice came over the intercom. "All civilian ships begin evacuation to coordinate Sierra 7 Alpha. Military vessels, you know your jobs. Remember, we're not here to win pretty, we're here to win." On the tactical display nearby, Kethavar could see what the humans were facing. The Void Devourers had arrived as a massive swarm of interconnected ships stretching across dozens of kilometers. They moved like a single organism, flowing through space with terrifying grace. Estimated. "Enemy strength?" asked Captain Rodriguez over the comm. "Over 200 large vessels, maybe 1,000 smaller ones," came the reply from the Indomitable's sensor station. "Total mass? It's hard to calculate. They're absorbing matter from the asteroids they pass." "Growing bigger," Chen muttered. "Mac, how are those special packages coming along?" "Antimatter warheads are loaded and ready, Admiral. But remember, one mistake, and we vaporize half our own fleet." "Understood. Torres, your boarding team's ready?" "Ready and eager, ma'am. My people have been studying the enemy hull configurations. We think we can get inside." "Good. All ships, execute pattern chaos." What followed defied every military manual Kethavar had ever read. Instead of maintaining formation, the human ships scattered like startled fish. Some accelerated directly toward the enemy. Others seemed to flee in the opposite direction. A few simply stopped moving entirely, floating dead in space. "They are retreating," Wispara said, confusion in her voice. "Some of them," Kethavar replied, watching more carefully. "But others are advancing. And those ships that stopped, they are positioning themselves between the enemy and our refugee vessels." The Void Devourers responded to the human approach with their usual tactics. Energy weapons emerged from their dark hulls, firing precisely targeted beams that had destroyed every previous enemy. The beams struck human ships and did very little. "Hull damage on the Persistence," reported a calm voice. "Breaches sealed. Continuing attack run. Retribution reporting shield failure," came another voice. "Switching to backup armor. Still operational." Kethavar stared. The Devourer's weapons, which had sliced through Altarian crystal ships like they were made of glass, were barely scratching. "The human vessels." "How?" he whispered. Mac's voice came over the comm, answering his unspoken question. "Reactive armor, Ambassador. When their energy beams hit, the outer hull ablates away, dispersing the energy. We lose armor plating, but the ship stays intact. And when the armor is gone, then we get creative." The first human ship to reach the enemy was the destroyer Defiance. Instead of engaging at a safe distance, it flew directly into the Devourer formation and began firing at point-blank range. Its weapons were crude by galactic standards, simple kinetic projectiles and explosive missiles, but at close range, they punched through the enemy hulls like they were made of paper. The Devourers responded by trying to absorb the human ship, extending tentacle-like appendages to wrap around its hull. But Captain Park of the Defiance had anticipated this. "Ramming speed!" he announced cheerfully. "All hands, brace for impact!" The Defiance smashed into the nearest Devourer ship, its reinforced hull tearing through enemy armor. As the two vessels locked together, Park's crew began the next phase of their attack. Boarding pods away! Armored capsules launched from the destroyer's hull, each one carrying a squad of human marines directly into the enemy ship. Instead of trying to cut their way through airlocks, the pods simply smashed through the hull and delivered their cargo of angry humans into the Devourer's interior. "Torres here," came the lieutenant's voice over the comm. "We're inside. This place is even uglier on the inside, beginning search for command centers." Other human ships were following similar tactics. The cruiser Indomitable rammed a Devourer ship so hard that both vessels spun out of control. The battleship Retribution positioned itself between two enemy vessels and began firing in both directions simultaneously. "This is insane," Wispara said. "They are destroying their own ships." "But they are taking the enemy with them," Kethvar observed. "Look." He was right. For every human ship that was damaged or destroyed, at least one Devourer vessel was eliminated. The enemy swarm, which had seemed invincible, was actually shrinking. "Defiance is lost," reported the tactical officer. "Captain Park's ship has been consumed." "Did Torres get out?" Chen asked. "Negative. Her team is still inside the enemy vessel. Then they'll finish the job from inside. Torres never leaves work half done." As if summoned by her words, a massive explosion tore through the Devourer ship that had consumed the Defiance. The enemy vessel split in half, its dark hull glowing with internal fires. "Torres here!" came a crackling voice over the comm. "Enemy! Command center destroyed. We're moving to the next target. Could use a pickup when convenient." "Roger that, Lieutenant. Resilient. Can you extract Torres's team?" "On our way, Admiral." The battle continued with the same chaotic intensity. Human ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting. Vessels with half their hulls torn away continued to fire their weapons. Crews that should have been dead kept finding new ways to hurt the enemy. But it was not without cost. The Steadfast exploded when its reactor was breached. The Courageous was pulled apart by Devourer tentacles. Good people were dying, and Kethavar could hear the pain in Admiral Chen's voice each time another ship was lost. "Admiral," came Mac's voice. "I'm reading massive energy buildups in the enemy formation. They're preparing something big." On the tactical display, the remaining Devourer ships were converging into a tight formation. Energy crackled between them as they combined their power for what looked like a devastating final attack. "All ships, withdraw to minimum safe distance," Chen ordered. "Mac, deploy the special packages. Antimatter warheads armed and ready. Target locked. Fire." 20 missiles streaked toward the enemy formation. They were small, crude things compared to the elegant weapons used by other species, but each one carried a warhead that could annihilate matter at the atomic level. The Devourer's point defense systems tried to intercept them, but the missiles had been designed by humans who expected their enemies to shoot back. They weaved and dodged, used decoys and jamming, and pressed their attack with mechanical determination. 18 of the 20 missiles were destroyed. The remaining 2 struck the center of the enemy formation and detonated simultaneously. The explosion was visible even from the observation deck of the Indomitable. A sphere of perfect light expanded outward, erasing everything it touched. When it faded, half the Devourer fleet was simply gone. "Direct hit," reported the sensor officer. "Enemy formation is broken. They're retreating." "Pursuing," announced Captain Rodriguez. "All ships, stay with them. Don't let them regroup." The surviving human ships gave chase, their battered hulls streaming atmosphere but their weapons still firing. "Let them run," Chen said quietly. "We've proven our point." But the Devourers were not finished. As they retreated, they began to change. The remaining ships started connecting to each other, forming a single massive entity that dwarfed anything the humans had faced. "Admiral," the sensor officer said, his voice tight with worry, "the enemy vessels are combining into a single unit. Mass readings are incredible." "How incredible?" The size of a small moon, ma'am, and it's turning around. The combined devourer entity began moving back toward the human fleet. As it approached, space around it seemed to bend and twist. Reality itself appeared to be straining under the weight of whatever the machines had become. All ships, emergency. Retreat, Chen ordered. Get our people out of there. But it was too late. The entity released a wave of energy that washed over the human fleet like a tsunami. Ships that had survived direct combat were suddenly failing as their systems overloaded and their hulls began to dissolve. We cannot run from this, Kethvar said, understanding flooding through him. It will pursue us. It will consume everything. Chen stood at the tactical display, her mechanical hands gripping the edge so hard that the metal began to bend. Her fleet was dying around her, and there was nothing conventional weapons could do against an enemy this large. Mac, she said finally, what's the status on reactor overloads? Admiral? Mac's voice was confused. You heard me. How many of our ships can we rig for reactor overload? A long silence. Then, all of them if necessary. But the explosion would take out anything nearby, Chen finished. Including us. Admiral? No, Rodriguez said over the comm. There has to be another way. There is no other way, Chen replied. This thing will eat the galaxy if we don't stop it here. All ships prepare. For final gambit, reactor overloads on my mark. The first ship to reach the massive devourer entity was the destroyer Relentless. Captain Wu's voice came over the comm one last time. See you on the other side, friends. The Relentless struck the enemy's hull and vanished in a ball of nuclear fire. The explosion carved a crater in the entity's surface, but something that large barely noticed the damage. Then the cruiser Defiant hit from another angle. Then the Stalwart. Then the Unbreakable. Each impact sent shockwaves through the enemy vessel. Each explosion tore away chunks of dark metal, but still the entity continued forward. It is not enough, Wispara said, watching the tactical display with growing horror. They are sacrificing themselves for nothing. But Kethvar was studying the readings more carefully. Look at the energy patterns, he said. Each explosion is causing fluctuations in their power grid. The humans are not trying to destroy it with single attacks. They are disrupting its systems. He was right. Deep inside the devourer entity, Torres and her remaining Marines were fighting their way toward the core that controlled the entire structure. Each reactor explosion on the surface sent power surges through the internal systems, making their job easier. Torres here, came her voice, accompanied by the sound of gunfire. We're at the core. This thing is huge, the size of a building. Beginning placement of charges. How long do you need? Chen asked from the bridge of the Indomitable. 5 minutes for proper placement. Maybe 3 if we do it quick and dirty. You have 3 minutes, Chen replied. After that, we're ramming this thing ourselves. On the tactical display, Kethvar could see the remaining human ships forming, up for their final attack. There were maybe 30 vessels left, all of them damaged, all of them running on backup power and determination. Admiral, came Mac's voice. Our reactor is reading critical. We won't survive a ramming attack. I know, Chen replied calmly, but we will survive long enough. The Indomitable, flagship of the human fleet, accelerated toward the enemy entity. Around it, the surviving ships matched course and speed. They were going to strike together, concentrating all their remaining firepower on a single point. Torres, status report, Chen called. Charges placed, came the reply. But Admiral, the detonation won't be enough unless we can disrupt their power grid at the exact same moment. Leave that to us, Chen said. Get your people out of there. Negative, ma'am. Someone needs to stay and make sure the charges go off. At the right time. Manual detonation only. Silence fell over the comm channels. Everyone understood what Torres was saying. She and her Marines were staying behind to die. Torres, Chen began. Admiral, it's been an honor, the lieutenant cut her off. Now ram this thing and give us something to work with. The human ships struck the devourer entity like bullets hitting a wall. The Indomitable led the charge, its reinforced hull tearing through layers of enemy armor. Admiral Chen stood on her bridge, watching her ship die around her, and smiled. For humanity, she said quietly. The flagship's reactor overloaded at the exact moment Torres triggered her explosives deep inside the enemy core. The combined detonation sent shockwaves through the entire entity, disrupting power systems and tearing apart the connections that held the massive structure together. For a moment, space was filled with brilliant light as matter and energy fought for dominance. When the light faded, the devourer entity was gone. In its place was an expanding cloud of debris and the fading echoes of massive explosions. Kethvar and Wispara stood on the observation deck of one of the few surviving human ships, staring at the empty space where a battle fleet had died. The silence was broken only by the soft hum of life support systems. "It is over," Wispara whispered. "The immediate threat, yes," Kethvar agreed. "But at such a cost. Of the human fleet that had numbered over 300 ships, fewer than 50 remained. Good people had died, Admiral Chen, Lieutenant Torres, Captain Wu, and so many others. Heroes whose names would be remembered as long as stories were told. But they had not died for nothing. The Void Devourers were broken, their coordinated swarms scattered across the galaxy. It would take them centuries to regroup, if they ever could. 3 days later, Kethvar stood in the main hangar of the human ship New Horizon, one of the civilian vessels that had survived the battle. Around him, Zephyrian refugees were settling into their new homes aboard the human fleet. Children from both species played together in the corridors. Zephyrian engineers worked alongside human mechanics, learning the art of keeping complex machines, running with spare parts and ingenuity. Human families had opened their homes to alien refugees, treating them not as guests, but as family. Captain Maria Santos, the new fleet commander, approached Kethvar with a data pad in her hands. "Ambassador," she said, "we've received response to your message to the Galactic Council." Kethvar read the message and nodded slowly. The Council was offering the human fleet formal recognition as a military force, along with significant financial compensation for their victory over the Devourers. "What will you tell them?" he asked. Santos smiled. "The same thing Admiral Chen would have said. We don't fight for money or recognition. We fight because it's the right thing to do." She looked around the hangar, where humans and Zephyrians were working together to repair damaged equipment. "Besides," she continued, "we already have everything we need. Good ships, good people, and a galaxy that's a little bit safer because we were here." A young human child ran past, chasing a Zephyrian youngster in an elaborate game of tag. Their laughter echoed off the metal walls, a sound of hope in a universe that had seen too much darkness. "What will you do now?" Kethvar asked. "What we've always done," Santos replied. "We'll keep moving, keep exploring, keep protecting those who need protection. There are other threats out there, other people who need help. And the refugees? They're part of the fleet now, if they want to be. Human, Zephyrian, whatever. Once you're family, you're family." That evening, Kethvar attended a memorial service for the humans who had died in the battle. It was held in the fleet's main assembly hall, a vast space that had been converted from a cargo bay. The ceremony was simple and functional, much like the humans themselves. Names were read, stories were shared, and promises were made to honor the sacrifice of the dead by protecting the living. Admiral Chen believed that the universe was dangerous but not evil, Captain Santos said in her eulogy. "She taught us that we don't fight because we're fearless, but because we're too stubborn to let fear stop us from doing what's right." After the service, Kethvar walked through the residential sections of the ship. Human families had adapted their quarters to accommodate Zephyrian guests. Children shared toys and games across species barriers. Adults worked together on projects that would benefit everyone. It was not the elegant, ordered society that the Galactic Council preferred. It was messy, chaotic, and sometimes inefficient. But it was also warm, inclusive, and unbreakably strong. Wispara found him in the observation lounge, looking out at the stars. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I am thinking about what we have learned," he replied. "The other species in the galaxy, we build beautiful ships and develop elegant weapons, but we fight wars as if they were art projects. The humans fight wars as if they were natural disasters. Is that better?" Kethvar considered the question. "Different. But when facing a force of nature like the Devourers, perhaps being natural disasters ourselves was exactly what we needed. They watched, the stars in comfortable silence. Around them, the human fleet continued its eternal journey through space, carrying refugees and hope to whatever corner of the galaxy needed them most. "The humans saved us," Wispaara said eventually. "Yes," Kethvar agreed. "But I think we saved them too, in a way. They needed to know that their sacrifices matter, that there are people worth fighting for. And now we become part of their story, and they become part of ours." Outside the windows, the stars stretched endlessly in all directions. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, filled with threats that had yet to reveal themselves. But somewhere, among those stars, a fleet of battered ships carried on the work of protection and hope. The universe might be hostile, but it was not empty of kindness. And as long as Earth's children sailed between the stars, the darkness would never be complete. The message that Kethvar eventually sent to the rebuilt Galactic Council was simple. "We came seeking refuge with legends and found instead the greatest guardians the galaxy has ever known. Humanity does not fight because they are fearless. They fight because they are too stubborn to let fear stop them from protecting others. They have earned not just our gratitude, but our loyalty. The human fleet sails on, and we sail with them." The response from the council was equally simple. "Understood. Safe travels." And in the vast darkness between stars, the legend of the Deathworld fleet continued to grow.